We haven't finished, or we're not through doing a thorough version of Thoreau. I haven't been thoroughly thrown out yet, so we're going to continue page 423. What?
What do you say? You haven't been doing what?
Thrown out of Thoreau. Reading
Thoreau.
Throw up. Doesn't make the last thing with the dead moose and all that stuff could have made you throw up. Life in the Commons, page 423. Life in the Commons, village, mountain, river. A raft of letters awaited Thoreau's return from Maine. Marston Watson had mailed him a glowing communication. Literally, 6 glowworms, rare and beautiful as precious gems. Soon the Watsons came to visit, and they puzzled over glowworms together. These are real glowworms. Meanwhile, Thoreau issued an apology to Ricketson for postponing a visit to New Bedford, and another ticklish, this one, to Blake for not inviting him to Maine. Blake was deeply hurt. So Thoreau tried to explain without coming right out and saying Blake wasn't up to the physical challenge. It would have been imprudent. He had left so suddenly. The trip had been so difficult, even the sturdy Ed Orr suffered considerably. You think Thoreau was in good shape? He's more of a professional hiker. It rained all the time. The mosquitoes were terrible. You think in the future that it'll be good to be bitten by mosquitoes? It'll transmit immunity. It rained all the time. The mosquitoes were terrible. They never even made it up, Cotterton. He would have to make it up to Blake later. For now, see, Blake wanted to go. But now there was a round of social calls.
Do you think that Blake is related to the Blake in England?
No. Blake is somebody else. To Natick, to examine...
No, I don't mean the same, but the same family related.
No, I don't know. To Natick, to examine Indian sites and landmark trees with those local naturalists up to the Assabet with Ed Orr.
The bird outside. It's been a while since we heard the bird.
Yeah, we actually have nature left. We have nature. Should I go out and listen to the birds? Or just listen now? We should set up a microphone so they can have bird sounds with their readings. And the old brick farmer, George P. Bradford, walks with Emerson, and best of all, long conversations with Bronson Alcott. Ever since poverty had forced him to sell Hillside, Bronson had been looking for a home. The Alcotts hated the isolation of Walpole, and their daughter Elizabeth's lingering illness, they never recovered from scarlet fever, made his search more urgent. They finally settled back in Concord, next door to their old home on Lexington Road. 12 acres with woodlands and a fine apple orchard that would supplement the family income. Soon they were calling it Orchard House. Do you think we should have a farm with an orchard? You want apples? Or you want to move to Florida and have oranges? We could go to California and have avocados. What if there's a brush fire? Calling it the Orchard House on September 22, 1857. Alcott closed the deal While Thoreau surveyed the grounds, and the family moved into rented rooms in their old house next door, the Hawthornes being still abroad. It's weird that the Alcotts and the Hawthornes shared the same house. In July 1858, repairs finally completed. The Alcotts moved into the home Louisa would make famous with Little Women. There you have it. Remember how half of great American literature came out of one town? Do you think if we moved to Concord, we could become writers by picking up the vibes? Thoreau found it good having them back in his daily life. When Elizabeth passed in March 1558, he attended her funeral and burial. When Anne married his friend Minette Brat's son, Thoreau danced at the wedding. See, Thoreau dances. So dancing at weddings is good. When Louisa directed a theatrical fundraiser for the anti-slavery cause, she had slavery in clerical dress take swigs out of a bottle in the form of a Bible while, quote, manifest destiny, unquote, staggered on stage, quote, whining for a bolt of whiskey, unquote. He was there. Returning through the village afterwards, Thoreau noticed the clouds were, quote, distinctly pink and reddish, somewhat as if reflecting a distinct fire. It was the aurora borealis, but by then everybody saw fire on the horizon. We're getting closer to the Civil War. Do you know that the series by Apple TV on Dickinson, right? They have an appearance of Thoreau. I don't know if there's historical evidence for it. They seem to be just making it up. But we were going to put Thoreau with Emily. They stole our idea. But maybe they had the idea and we thought it by... They're smart. They're smart to use good material. Why, when they could use dumb stuff.
They got all of our ideas that we say.
Well, Thoreau did pass by into Amherst. Throughout his years of village life, Thoreau had always enjoyed the annual cattle show, known more formally as the Middlesex County Agricultural Fair. A cattle show is just the fair, but in the fall of 1857 he was more than a spectator. That spring he had planted 6 seeds from the patent office labeled Poitrine Zona Grossa, large yellow squash, and 2 of them sprouted, one yielding 4 huge squashes and the other a single squash that tipped the scales at, my goodness, 123.5 pounds. And captured the cattle show premium. That's a big squash. The man who bought Thoreau's prize-winning squash planned to sell the seeds for 10 cents apiece. That's a lot, 10 cents.
That's what they do after that.
10 cents for a seed back then. But it was so coarse it was inedible. Exactly the kind of artificial forcing that turned the most simple and wholesome garden plants into rank weeds, wrote Thoreau, foul products of human vileness and exurience. So this bigism, you know how we say that the smaller things are better? Which is better, like is a small eggplant better than a big one? Is a small cucumber better than a big one?
And swallow it to put it down.
Which plants are You prefer a small okra to a big okra? Small is better now. So you realize the truth. His pessimism fit everybody's mood. For that year, the talk at the cattle show was the panic of 1857. They had a stock market crash. Panic of 1857. Nobody seems to know the cause of all this trouble. Thoreau's neighbor, Fanny Pickard, wrote her mother from New York. Quote, the hard times is all we hear of. Everybody has failed. There is the fear of great suffering and a great deal of crime. See, these panics and things have come and gone like over throughout history. The best way to be a Wall Street stock market investor is to study history.
Emily didn't speak about it.
Huh?
Emily didn't mention it.
Emily didn't speak about the Panic of 57? Well, she's not very worldly and connected to business affairs except for her brother and father, right?
But still.
Well, and they're lawyers, and lawyers always make out either way, whether it's a panic or stock market goes up or down, they always make money. Yeah, well, the causes were many. Wheat prices plunged as the Crimean War ended. See, you need war to keep prices up. That's why we maintain continuous war in the U.S. Russia re-entered the global market. Western railroads were failing. Banks were collapsing. And even the USS Central America sank in a hurricane, sending 400 souls and 30,000 pounds of California gold, worth $500 million, to the bottom of the ocean. Wow.
Central America.
What?
Hurricanes in Central America, what do they mean?
No, a hurricane. Don't you know what a hurricane is?
Yeah, but in Central America, usually they are allowed Florida.
No, the boat, dear, the ship's name is SS Central America is the name of a ship, a large ship. 400 people died and 30,000 pounds of gold went down. Businesses all over the North went bankrupt, causing mass unemployment and urban riots. See, those who do not study history end up repeating the same mistakes. That's why I read the history of interest rates back 5,000 years. Was Strunk, what was the guy's name? Strunk or somebody. He worked at Salomon Brothers. If you want to predict interest rates, you should read the history of interest rates. I remember looking at the Akkadian and Syrian interest rates. The Depression spread around the globe and lasted into the Civil War. It lasted into the Civil War. You know, it's like there was a depression prior to the Civil War.
That's what started the conflict.
I don't know. The South, I think, may have been better off because they had agriculture. They were still making money selling cotton and stuff. In the West, the North was probably suffering. It was all utterly bewildering. Thoreau was exuberant. The panic vindicated everything he ever said. Quote, if thousands are thrown out of employment, unquote. He wrote sagely to Blake, quote, it suggests that they were not well employed. Why don't they take the hint? Were they doing the wrong thing, you see? For decades, men of wealth and power had stood on the Roman porticos of banks and built granite atop safes of iron. and mocked his transcendental moonshine. You see, he was just a philosophic woodchuck in a way, and they mocked him the same way they mock me as a poet now. Now they were all toppling away, Concord's own bank among them. Concord's own bank among them, Concord's bank, and lo, there is the moonshine still, serene, beneficent, and unchanged. Quote, how grandly your philosophy sits now in these trying times, exulted Rickinson. When a merchant friend failed, Rickinson offered him his copy of Walden. So if somebody's bank fails, you can give them a copy of Walden. They could learn simplicity and go into the woods, maybe. Despite the collapse, Thoreau had all the surveying work he could handle. Now when you have real estate sales, you need a surveyor, right? You get a counter-cyclical. It's good to have a counter-cyclical business. All fall, his journal thinned under the strain. He hated seeing his dear Walden Woods mapped so meticulously. Rummaging in crumbling old deeds reminded him that his wilderness was really just some villager's familiar woodlot from which his ancestors have sledded their fuel for generations, or some widow's thirds minutely described in some old deed. In one of those old deeds he found a flicker of redemption. It turned out that in 1797 his Walden Beanfield had belonged to George Minot, brother of his father-in-law, Joannes Minot, descended from Thomas Minot in Essex, who had been the abbot of Walden. Thoreau's family history was inscribed deep into those Walden woods, even into Walden Pond's very name. He's related to the person who gave the name to Walden Pond. To compensate, Thoreau read all 5 volumes of John Ruskin's Modern Painters, though in the end he was disappointed. When he wanted to see nature, Ruskin wanted to see nature through art. But Ruskin showed him how to see autumn through an artist's eye, and he painted in words of red Walden, of color, fields, in abstract form like Indian tattoos. For everywhere Thoreau looked that fall, Walden spoke of Indians. They may have been swept away, but their Canneal arrowheads remained. Quote, such are our antiques, these were our predecessors. Why then make so great ado about the Roman and the Greek and neglect the Indian? Do you think they should fuss over Greeks and forget about Indians? Or should they be fair? The insight grew. The man of science makes his mistake, and the mass of mankind along with him. You think science makes mistakes? That you should coolly give your chief attention to the phenomenon which excites you as something independent on you, and not as it is related to you. How, then, was he related to Maine's Pines question? To build Concord's new homes, people turned beaver, damming streams, raising lakes, turning nature itself against itself, to float their spoils out of the country. In a way, you make a dam so you could float the trees out, right? You cut them down. If you make a dam, then you can cut the trees and float the logs out. Like 10,000 mice, they nibbled at the base of the noblest trees, toppling them and dragging them off, then scampering away, quote, to ransack some other wilderness, quote, for what? To build the hollow wealth destroyed by the Panic of 1857. The 400 who drowned in the SS Central America were like men gasping out, quote, I am worth $100,000, unquote, as the weight of their gold bore them to the bottom. You know, Thoreau's writings partly inspired the creation of the natural parks, the park system, the national park system, because it looks like there wasn't going to be any land left that wasn't ransacked. His new writing gave him a surge of joy. The romantics were mistaken. That writing poetry was for youths only. Quote, youth obtained the vision, but the real poetry took a lifetime of, quote, steady, corresponding endeavor hitherward. Does that mean that you can write poetry now? Not just seeing the road, but traveling it, which took real resolve. He reflected that Thanksgiving as he hauled his boat out of the river and braced for winter. To further protect his throat from the coming cold, he grew his Galway whiskers into, as Rickinson teased, a terrible long beard. But winters soured, the January air warm, the snow didn't fall. The river didn't freeze, and one hardly needed gloves. What is winter without snow? And ice. In this latitude, the bare earth is unseen sightly. This winter is but unburied summer. Do you think it's ugly not to have snow in winter? The woods is ugly without snow. In a foul mood, Thoreau even lashed out at the, quote, the Indian, inevitably and resignedly passing away. In spite of all our efforts to Christianize and educate them, the fact is the history of the white man is a history of improvement. That of the red man, a history of fixed habits, stagnation, unquote. It was as if he'd never gone to Maine, never met Joe Polis, yet on that very day he offered, quote, Chesuncook to the Atlantic, insisting on withholding, quote, the Allegashan East Branch, unquote, because Paulus, that Christianized and educated Indian, would read it. Fatalism was rare for Thoreau. Perhaps he was lashing out at Paulus for being too literate, too subdued, or at Lowell for enforcing the same old gloomy savagism. It seems he thinks that Indians succumbed to it as well. There were other sources of tension. His father, the family's quiet and steady anchor, was gravely ill. In November, the family alerted his father's sisters, Jane and Maria, to come up from Cambridgeport. Cambridgeport's near Cambridge, I guess. By New Year's, his ominous cough had worsened and the family knew he was dying. Henry had to shoulder the family business even as the Panic of 1857 was hitting home. Now the family business is pencils. Their customers were often unable to pay or paid in IOUs that Henry feared were worthless. He pushed to increase his surveying income, and when Thatcher came to visit, he pumped him for business advice. One obvious solution was to hire outside help, and in May 1858 Henry did just that, traveling to New York City to find an agent for his graphite business. His graphite is pencil business. As his father wrote to Thatcher, Henry succeeded, but not until he cut their price in half. Their old rivals, the Munros, had cut their prices too, and the Depression was still squeezing business. His glum mood started to lift as spring approached. On March 5th, he put Chasumcook in the mail to Lowell, while still riding a high from reading Father Russell's Dictionary of the Abenaki language, quote, a very concentrated, trustworthy natural history of that people. Indians were back to being thrilling and generative. That very evening Thoreau was riveted by the performance of a, quote, a Chippewa Indian, a Dr. Mung somebody. Mung Wudance, or George Henry, was a Mississauga Ojibwe from Canada and a friend of George Copley, whose book Thoreau owned, and an accomplished speaker, tall, commanding, and at least with his audience, who had led his performance troupe on tour across England to Europe. After smallpox took his wife and 3 children, Mawudas toured the United States on his own, selling herbal medicines. Hence, doctor, unquote. Thoreau listened closely as Mawudas does, draped in the theatrical Indian garb his audience demanded. A buffalo skin robe decorated with porcupine quills, an eagle feather headdress, explained his people's origins over the Bering Strait from Asia, showed how they cradled their children, detailed their marriage customs, displayed their inscribed birch bark basketry, and blow-darted arrows straight through an apple at 20 feet. He was aided by a Penobscot friend, none other than Joe Polis's brother, Peter Polis. When the Concord audience laughed at Mawudas' speaking voice, like Polis and the Penobscot generally, he ended his words with and m. Thoreau righteously defended his subdued Indian accent, the real bow arrow twang, and he was deeply moved by what he saw. How little I know of that arbor vitae, which I have learned only what science can tell me. It is but a word. It is not a tree of life, but there are 20 words for the tree and its different parts which the Indian gave, which are not in our botanies, which imply a more practical and vital science. In the light of Abenaki's words, he saw the world, quote, from a new point of view, revealing a life within a life, threading the woods between our towns still. A few days later, Thoreau came across an Indian fish trap made of willow wands, and full of fish, a cunning art that filled him with regret. Had his father stayed on the farm with an Indian for his hired man, how many aboriginal ways we children should have learned from them. He drew it carefully, thinking how the Indian words were objects and their objects words. The man who wove that fish trap basket was meditating. A small poem in his way. It was equal to a successful Stanley whose subject was spring. Soon Thoreau was weaving his own spring stanzas. His subject was for this year was frogs. His theme was patience. Quote, he must take his position and then wait and watch, unquote. He brought frog and fish eggs home and watched them hatch. The little frogs woke him up at night with their jostling and peeping. He noticed how closely frog song registered the temperature. Quote, perfect thermometers, hydrometers, and barometers, who expressed with their voices, quote, the very feelings of the earth. Emerson was fascinated by Thoreau's ability to sit still for hours, becoming, quote, a log among the logs. In Zen Buddhism, they talk about to sit like a dead tree stump. They have dead sitting, dead log, dead sitting sun. To sit like a dead tree log. Actually, some of them make fun of dead sitting sun. They say they just sit there like a bunch of dead beats. They're supposed to be alive, according to Joaquin. Don't just sit there like a dead tree stump. Emerson was fascinated by Thoreau's ability to sit still for hours, becoming, quote, a log among the logs, until the birds and frogs came to him. But he also thought his friend carried his studies too extreme. Quote, my dear Henry, he wrote, quote, a frog was made to live in a swamp, but a man was not made to live in a swamp. Yours ever are. But young people loved to enter Thoreau's charm circle, and their numbers were growing. Edith Emerson was cultivating a wild garden. Dr. Bartlett's son Edward had an aquarium full of snails, bugs, and salamanders, which everybody envied, and Ellen Emerson wrote her cousin that, quote, we are, as usual at this season, interested, especially in flowers and birds, and Mr. Thoreau is in great demand. Thoreau is now in demand again due to global warming. And there were others. Mary Brown sent more flowers from Vermont, and the Worcester Circle sent a hummingbird's nest. Marston Watson sent pear trees from Hillside. Quote, this looks like fairy housekeeping, pleased Thoreau wrote back. We stop page 429 in the chapter on wild fruits, 1857 to 1859. Reading from Henry David Thoreau, A Life by Laura Dassow Walls. What did we cover? Indians and the Panic of 1857, his views on Wall Street.